Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Astera's Centerprise Best Practices webinar series. This webinar highlights features in Centerprise that enable integration with popular social media, web services, and cloud applications. We'll demonstrate how Centerprise REST, SOAP, and proprietary connectors quickly integrate your cloud data, including Google, Yahoo, and Bing REST services, Amazon Web Services, social media like Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, online databases such as Salesforce.com, QuickBase, and Zoho, and Zendesk, Bugzilla, and others. Please be sure to type in your questions, and at the end of the webinar, we'll answer as many as time allows for. We'll capture all questions and answer them in a written Q&A document that we'll post on our blog and our support site. Now I'll turn you over to our technical specialist, Mike O'Quinn, who will be conducting today's presentation. Mike?
Thanks, Brittany. Welcome to this in the latest edition of the series of Centerprise webinars. As Brittany said, we'll be talking about how Centerprise can connect to external applications, specifically the cloud and social media variety, through the Centerprise Web Services component. A little bit about a little overview about Centerprise before we get started. It's an ETL platform. It's a system. It's a complete management of your information assets. It's comprised of an intuitive drag-and-drop interface designed for business users, developers, and anybody in between, which is probably the majority of our customers. They probably have some sort of development background, but more on the business analyst side, the people that know the data. So it allows you to develop a fully fledged enterprise application in a completely code-free environment. For when you're developing, you have a single-click data preview. This is very important because as you're developing these things, you want to be able to quickly see the results of them. And I'll show you the data preview for those of you unfamiliar with it in Centerprise. It is a high-performance parallel processing engine, 100% .NET code. This means it's reliable, scalable, and secure. Operates in batch, change, or real-time mode, and I'll explain what I mean by that. But basically, in batch, you can process many records at once, change just the records that have changed, and real-time or near real-time be able to process information as it arrives. The things that Centerprise can connect to are all major transactional and data warehouses databases. Flat files such as fixed length, delimited Excel, hierarchical files such as XML, EDI, JSON, and even custom hierarchical files. Services, including SOAP and REST variety, and that's what we'll be focusing on today. And we even have special cloud application connectors for Salesforce.com, Dynamics, QuickBooks, and more. So why is this an important topic for your company, and why does Centerprise have its own webinar dedicated to this subject? Well, because there's a lot of it out there. So if you take a look at this graph here, there's this company called, I believe, Web Trends or Web Trackers on the internet, and they've been tracking public APIs over the internet. And you can see that from 2005 to 2011, the growth in the number of publicly available APIs. And this is probably not even covering, maybe a specific, obscure company that, they had no idea that you had a web service. But you can see that as 2011, there's over 5,000 of them. In 2014, or the current number they have, is over 11,000. So you can see that it just keeps, doubling year after year. Eventually, it'll plateau, but not until basically everything is a web service now. Another reason is that IT is more and more in the cloud. More and more companies are moving their infrastructure into the cloud. It's starting to make a lot more sense to rent machines rather than buy them, especially with Amazon.com and their EC2 instances and S3 functionality where you can EC2, you can rent machines, and S3 where you can actually have like a Dropbox.com like storage device. The need for on-premise networks is growing, is becoming less and less important. So as more of the infrastructure gets farmed out into the cloud, the more and more likely it is you're going to have to be able to communicate and work with that data that resides in the cloud. and Centerprise gives you a lot of tools to be able to do that. So here's an example of Amazon Web Service usage from this company called Netcraft, where they've tracked the IP addresses, computers, host names, and active sites from February 2009 to May 2013. And you can see this just basically linear plot here of the graph of Amazon. So social media can be very valuable. It can be a treasure trove for those who know how to use it. For instance, Twitter has 243 million active users. Facebook has 1.23 billion users. In fact, the brand like on Facebook has been estimated to be worth $174. So that's just somebody clicking a like on their Facebook feed, and that for the marketer that's worth $174. So you can imagine that there's a ton of data out there, not just marketing data, but other sorts of data that's very valuable information. All it has to do is to be mined. Centerprise gives you that ability to be able to connect to that data and then process it any which way you like. Slice it up, dice it, process it, join it with other forms of information. With Centerprise, you can use that data and access it and manipulate it very easy. So the data is not just abundantly there, it's also has a very high potential for you in your applications. So how does Centerprise benefit your endeavors in the connecting to web service and external applications? Well, it's a complete ETL system. ETL stands for extract, transfer, and load. But when you start combining it with web services and the real-time mode, it actually becomes more of an enterprise service bus. You can actually connect multiple of these services together, do your processing all within your local server, and then move them to another web service, for example. And you can create a mashup of different web services, not just working with a single web service. In fact, you have all of the data flow and integration functionality in conjunction with using web services. This gives you all of the transformations available in the toolbox, which I'll go over when we show the application. And basically, as soon as you can read the data from a web service, you can manipulate the data, you can transform it, you can profile it, you can set up error messages and set it up for further processing, send it downstream to another process. Basically, anything you can imagine with the data flow you can do with the web services. Our connectors communicate with social media outlets and web services, or basically, it should say via web services. And again, it's capable of operating both batch and real-time mode. Some of the common services that are supported include Google, Yahoo, Bing. And these are all the REST web services. Amazon, I believe, has both SOAP and REST web services. Social media, including Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, etc. Online databases such as Salesforce.com, Data.com, QuickBase, Soho, etc. And infrastructure sites such as Zendesk, Bugzilla, and others. This is just a very limited list. The way this Centerprise is designed, you can pretty much connect to any RESTful web services or SOAP web service. So how does Centerprise social media, how does Centerprise work with all this stuff? Well, basically, it gives you the ability to connect to it using what we call actions. So actions are just the little boxes that show up on the diagram, and we allow for two different types of service mechanisms out there. So you're going to have SOAP and RESTful web services, and we also support the latest in web security technologies, from basic authentication to OAuth authentication. And we support both OAuth version 1 and OAuth version 2 to make sure that the communication between Centerprise and your web service stays secure. So again, what an action in Centerprise is just a little box in the diagram. So let's take a quick peek here at the Centerprise. And this is Centerprise for those of you uninitiated with it. What you're looking at here is the IDE, or this is the client portion of the application. And it is where you define data flows. So to click on it, to create a new data flow, you just click on this little icon here, and this brings open this .df little window here. On the left side, you'll see all of the the toolboxes here, and you'll find a list of sources that are available to you to be able to drag onto the diagram. So for example, if I want a database source, I can just drag it there. Here's a connection that I have to a database. I can just connect that, click that, and you'll see that I have my my little layout here. And this is a flat layout, but it can also be hierarchical. And this is important because a hierarchical layout is the root of what we're talking about when we're talking about a web service. So unlike a flat structure that you get from a database table, such as if I right-click and select Preview, you'll see that I get this flat structure. In a RESTful web service or a SOAP web service, most likely you're going to get a hierarchical JSON or XML file. So that is where you'll drag and drop the services and be able to read XML or JSON type hierarchies. The transformations in the toolbox allow you to do pretty much anything you want with the data. Those include being able to aggregate data, being able to filter data, being able to join data, route, pass through, normalize, etc. Now it's beyond the scope of going over exactly what each one of these are for this demonstration, but we have other webinars where we talk in detail about each of these transformations. But just know that once you receive the data from anywhere, whether it be a database, a file, or a web service, you can then manipulate it any which way you want through the data flow toolbox. And then you can also create a workflow to be able to do steps and do these things through orchestration. So for example, let's say that my first step would be to be able to make a REST service call, and then my next step would be to create a data flow to be able to process that file, and then I make another service call back. So you can see that this one might be like download file, process, change the name here to process file, and finally to upload file. And this can be a single unit of work for you to basically take care of your data file processing by using a couple of RESTful web connectors in the process. So this is the toolbox, and these are the actions that you'll use in the course of your creating your data flows. So you can see here that we have different types of transformations, and I kind of went over those. And we also have data profiling available for you to use in your data flows. So not only can you move data from point A to point B, but you can also data profile them and be able to see and mark messages, error messages, custom error messages, to be able to see what your data actually looks like. So you can mix and match, let's say, data from Google Analytics to data from your databases, and so on and so forth. So going back to, so in here you can see what those services here. We have this REST service call and basically another one for the SOAP service call. So those are the actions on the diagram. They take an input and produce an output. For services, inputs are generally parameters. Outputs are the structures themselves. So real quick, just back here, we have a RESTful web service here example. So here, for example, here's a SOAP web service, and here you can see the input is, and the operation is just subtract two numbers. We have number one being one input, number two being the other, and the output being the actual structure. In this case, the output is just a single scalar value, so it's not very tree-like, but most of the time, especially the external web services, you're going to get an actual XML or JSON structure. Okay, which brings us to SOAP versus REST. What is SOAP and what is REST? These are the two technologies that are employed in Centerprise in order to be able to talk to these things. And before I keep going, just a reminder that you can type in any questions that you have at any time, and we will try and answer them at the end of this webinar. If we're out of time, we can go ahead and put them up online, and we'll answer your questions in written form. But please feel free to ask them at any point. There'll be somebody fielding these questions, and they'll feed them to me at the end of this webinar, and I'll be able to answer them. So just a reminder. Okay, so SOAP versus REST. What is SOAP? SOAP stands for Simple Object Access Protocol, and it was the de facto standard of web services 5-10 years ago. And it was a collaboration with Microsoft, IBM, and several other major corporations. And it was a way to communicate over the web, or over not just the web, but mainly over the web, and be able to do what we call an RPC mechanism, basically remote procedure call. You say, hey, do this on your remote site and give me some data back. REST stands for Representational State Transfer, and it's basically got us a series of principles that allow you to utilize the existing HTTP structure. So SOAP is a protocol on top of another protocol. REST is just using the HTTP protocol itself. So there is both types of services, the SOAP crowd and the REST crowd. More and more it's becoming, when you're talking about these external applications, it's more and more the REST crowd. SOAP is the more private and enterprise kind of web service, or service, I should say. And REST is the more public and webby interface. So if you have any new company that you can think of and they're exposing a web service, most likely it is a RESTful variety. So again, RESTful services is pretty much taking over the web, and it is the de facto standard for web services. SOAP is still strong in the Microsoft stack by way of WCF, and you'll still find plenty of these intra-corporation services and SOA application services on-premise, and Centerprise will be able to connect to both of these. Okay, so at this point, I'd like to take a look at a couple of examples that I've put together for you. In this case, we'll be looking at creating a workflow with Zendesk and be able to create tickets on the fly. And then we have Google Analytics, be able to access data from that, and using the box.com data store. So first off, though, let's take a look at a very simple internal SOAP service, and then we'll get to the more RESTful ones. Because the SOAP one, I just created an on-premise web application, and it is listening for on a web service .asmx file, and you can see here is the service description. So if I right-click my mouse here, say copy link address, I can drag and drop the SOAP transformation onto the diagram, open it by right-clicking and selecting properties, and here it will give me the WSDL file path. So here I'll type in or paste my file path, and here you can see it's the address of my local host followed by the service name, WSDL. When I do that, it's going to read the WSDL and parse it and give me a list of service call types. And this is just what type of service that you're actually trying to communicate to. Here it's listing both two types, SOAP 1.1 and 1.2. So we're going to go ahead and select SOAP 1. And once I do that, I have a list of operations. So again, this is read by all the metadata with the WSDL. So if you need to communicate to a SOAP web service or a WC web service, you will use this mechanism. For legacy web services, you'll want to find the WSDL file. For WCF services, you're going to want to find the metadata exchange file. But it's pretty much it operates in the exact same way. So once you do that, you're presented with the different operations. When I click Add and click Next, you can see that my inputs now, under the input node of the transformation, are number 1 and number 2, both integers, and the output being value, which is a nameless return value, also an integer. To be able to use this transformation, we have to map the inputs into it. So that's why this is called a web service transformation, is that it requires you to set inputs in order to get a return value back from it. So the data you're going to get back is going to be multiple records, or in this case it could be a single record. It really depends on the web service itself and what you're using it for. So that's why we have the SOAP lookup and the destination. The destination is kind of deprecated, so there's only the SOAP transformation and the SOAP lookup. The difference between the two is that the transformation will return you a batch of records, where the SOAP lookup is used to, let's say, you need to look up the zip code, or look up the city based on a zip code. You have a service for that. That's only going to return you one record. So once you have these things mapped into it, so here you can see that I have a variable 5 and a variable 3 as my inputs to it, I can now right-click and select Preview Output. And this will give me the output in a hierarchical format, with the root node being the name of the transformation, object path being output, and then the value. So in this case, we took two numbers, 5, 3, and ran it to the subtract web service. So we can change that service to now be add. And now when we preview that, we get the 5 plus 3 result of the web service. So no matter what the web service is, this preview acts in exactly the same way. You're going to right-click and be able to preview and see the data as you're doing it. And then just like you have the input, you have the outputs, which will allow you to map further downstream. So these can be standalone, just service calls, or they can be a part of a much larger data flows and subflows to create components that are kind of black boxes and seamless behind the scenes. And I'll show that in just a few minutes of how you can utilize Centerprise reusability in order to create these service black boxes that work within existing applications or existing projects that you might have in Centerprise. So that is the SOAP connector. So an example of the REST connector might be, for example, let's take a look at this one here. We have the REST query, and this one is slightly different, and I'm going to drag and drop the REST service call onto the diagram. And when I do that, you'll see that you'll automatically get an output and the response info node without having to set up any of the layout so far. So basically, anytime you make a REST service call, which is just an HTTP call to an endpoint somewhere on the web somewhere, you're going to get this information back. You're going to get the content type, the length, status description. All that is available to you for you to use right out, as soon as you make a call to a web service. This allows you a great deal of flexibility in being able to connect to any web service. So you just point to the URL, the resource, and then you'll get the value back. So let's take an example of that. So let's take this one here. If I preview this one, this is actually communicating to Zendesk. And there it goes. And it's going to give me the forum entries on a website. So here you can see the get tickets, output, the response info, object that we were talking about earlier, including the URL, the status code, and the actual content of your request, what the type it is, and the content length. Underneath that, you can see that we were able to parse that information under this root object. So this is what the actual data that it returns. The data that's found under the content node, you can find it parsed under the object path node here. Or, I'm sorry, under the root node is where it's going to parse it. So depending on what data you get back, whether it be XML or JSON, Centerprise will be able to parse it and give it to you easily mappable, so you can map it downstream to your other targets, such as files or databases or other web services. So let's take a look under the hood at what this thing is doing. So let's go ahead and open it up here. And here you can see that we have the first thing it's asking for is the HTTP method. So because we are utilizing the HTTP protocol or RESTful design principles, we are always going to be communicating by either a get, put, post, or delete verb. The timeout is how long Centerprise is going to wait. We can bump that up to 10 seconds if you like. And for the URL, it's going to be the URL that you are base URL that you're connecting to. So for example, we are connecting to astera.zendesk.com, and our resource, and this actually it's going to be API v2, and the resource that we want is forums.json. That's just Zendesk's own little idiosyncrasy where they put a .json at the end of it, but basically I think they only allow JSON protocol anyway. The next thing you're going to see here is the authentication screen, and this is where you're going to enter your credentials. So for example, Mike.1 blah 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 blah, and then your password. So having this password in there, or sometimes you'll get a security token depending on the service, you're going to enter those in and you'll be able to log in to the application. I've already filled out that information here, so I don't have to enter it in again. And here at the bottom, you'll see that we also have a pagination control. So the pagination allows you to select this in order to get not bring in all records, but to bring in a limited type of records. And that works by sometimes services will a lot of times have something like this, where you'll have page 1, page equal, I'm sorry, it'll be something like page equals, and then what you'll do is type page 1, and it'll use that page, it'll use that item number range in order to construct the service and to be able to make a call to the service using appropriate page numbers. So you have your option for item number range or next page number, and then you can these numbers will indicate the number of the pages and what the last one is. So it'll automatically construct this URL for you in order to be able to paginate items. So the next screen is where items are going to show up as the inputs of it. In this case, there is no input for this particular flow or this particular service, since we're just not providing any inputs. We're just pointing it to a resource and getting that list of items. But I will show you one with Google. We're talking about Google, where we will point to a resource and get a different set of items based on the input. So let's go. The next screen is the input, and this only applies if you have an input. We don't have an input, so that's why it's grayed out here. The next screen is the output, and you can see here that we have layout building options. First of all, we have the layout format, whether your service returns JSON or XML or none. None can be useful. Let's say if you're downloading let's say just downloading a CSV file, you would select none instead of any of these two formats. You have the ability to choose what the encoding is for the file. In this case, the default is UTF-8, pretty much the language of the web now. So for web services, unless you're dealing with a service from another country, most likely you don't have to change the encoding there. And then an option for how to build a layout. So here you have, if you run the request, use a sample text or from a schema file. Since we're talking about JSON, we're just going to use either sample text, or if we want to be lazy, we can just run the request. So that's what I'm going to do here. I click Build Layout, and that'll give me the output layout here. So here you'll see the output layout is the layout or the structure of the return object being returned from this particular resource. So when I point to forums.json from Zendesk, I get this type of structure. So here you can see the properties, forums, and then it has a collection of items. If I click OK, I then have that exact same tree here along with the response info. So how do I use this information? Well, you're going to use it in conjunction with one of the transformations that you have in your toolbox. So for example, let's take the pass-through, which is going to do nothing except give me a kind of coalesced items that I want to actually deal with and kind of strip away everything else. But other than that, it's not doing much of anything. So I'm going to take the name, the description, and let's see what else do I have here. And let's take updated at. Scroll down for the updated at field, and let's go ahead and preview. Okay, so you see at this point now I have taken a hierarchical structure and flattened it out to a more tabular structure. And here are the names of all of my forums. And let's say that we want to filter out the forums where I do not have a description. That would be very easy to do by just dragging and dropping our filter transformation, connecting all the maps, and you can see that I did an auto very quickly and easily, was able to auto map and create a layout for that. And to do that, I can just use my expression builder. Again, you can find more information about this on our other data transformation and complex data integration series webinar from a couple months ago, I think. So I'm going to go ahead and just say that is not null or white space and take the description. So when this is true, I'm going to pass this information downstream. Oops, I think I wanted to do the opposite of that. Is false. Okay. And there we go. Now I have this name, description, and updated at, and now I can take this information and, let's say, write it to a file, deposit it into a database table. Anything I want to do with that, I can do. Let's say I want to make a nice report for all of my forum entries. XLS, click OK, run it, and now I have my 8 records as my output. Click on this, and I can see my fruits of my labor here on this nice Excel sheet. So this is the simplest of simple examples, but you can see that I was able to communicate to a third-party application, Zendesk, via a REST service call connector, and utilize it as if it were any of our other sources, such as a file or a database. One thing you have to keep in mind is of course, the latency of this is not as quick as basically being on the network, but as long as you utilize smart caching mechanisms, you should be fine. So this is an example of we just took the data from Zendesk. Now let's take an example of using Zendesk to actually, how would you create, let's say, a real-time workflow for that? So let's go ahead and create a new workflow. And we're going to go ahead and take a file. So we're going to go ahead, take the file, and this is going to be incoming error message. And as soon as we have this file that has a certain structure, it could be delimited file, XML file, what have you, we're going to go ahead and write a ticket to our Zendesk application. So we're going to go ahead, and this time, instead of a GET, our HTTP method is going to be a POST. So we're going to actually, and the POST, I believe, is input, basically create, and put is being, shorthand for modify. Get, of course, is to select. Delete is to remove. So again, our base URL is going to be https astera.zendesk.com. Our resource, I believe, is tickets.json, and we are going to want to create tickets. So let's go ahead, and we're actually going to go visit our our, here we go, here's the documentation. So we're going to go ahead and bring up our website here. And let's actually go to Zendesk. So the way you would work with this is you would go to the documentation page of the website. Let's look at tickets and creating tickets. And here, and it should give us an example of, here we do. Okay, here we go, example request. So we're going to copy this little JSON snippet, go back to Centerprise, and now I'm not going to actually fill in the credentials because we're not going to need it. Select JSON, and this time I'm going to say use sample text, paste it, and then build layout. So here you can see that now I have the input layout, comment, click OK. Expand the input. And then some expression, create ticket body. Now this is an actual real-life example of one of our own internal processes where we actually use and dog food the REST service connector. So anytime we get some special mechanism coming from one of our internal services here at Astera, it'll actually go ahead and create a ticket automatically for us. So the way we do that is we use the real-time functionality. I'm not going to go over the other events here, but I can show you one of them, which is kind of, if you're familiar with Centerprise, you're probably familiar with this one already, and that's the scheduler. So we're going to go ahead and anytime one of those files comes in, so we're watching we're going to go ahead and run that data flow. There we go. Let's go ahead and save it. So let's call it create ticket. Save. Copy full path. Scheduler. File path. And we are going to only execute this when we see a file come on that directory. So we can click on when file is dropped, and then which directory to actually watch. Give it a little bit of time there. Okay, it looks like my network's not going to be hit. I'm just going to pick this one. Doesn't matter which directory it is, but basically once we pick any directory, we're going to save it, and we're going to execute that data flow. So now we've created a kind of a real-time process of how we can utilize web services to be able to manipulate data on a remote system in near real time. So in this case, it's when a file is dropped. The Centerprise real-time capabilities also allow for, let's say, listening for another service. So if you get a service coming into Centerprise, it can go ahead and trigger another service. You can poll an interval on so many seconds, and then go ahead and execute that service. You can listen for a database trigger. So as soon as a record, you get a new record or a modified record in the database, go ahead and execute that data. I'm sorry, that web service. So it's pretty much up to you and how you want to configure your application and be able to use web services in real-time mode. So this is an example of using a web service in real-time mode. Now kind of back to the batch mode of how another example of how you might use a web service. Let's go to Google, for example, and let's take this one. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and you'll see here that we just again have just an output here. Now let's go ahead and preview. Here's our Google call, output, response info, and the actual items we get back. So you can see that we scroll down, we have a bunch of rows here, and the actual data that I'm interested in is this thing here. So let me go ahead and add another pass-through. Preview. And this is giving me a bunch of rows. I'm not sure why we're getting every other row has no data, but you can see that we can easily take care of that with a filter, for example. But this is the call to that. So let's take a look at what we're doing here. And you can see here that we are using the base URL, which is Google APIs, followed by the resource URL. And here you can see that I have a lot of stuff in that resource URL. We have the ID, start date, end date, metrics, GA visits, country, and etc. So for simplicity, I've gone ahead and just hard-coded it in there, but most likely you're going to want to be able to change that. So for this example, what we want to do is we want to utilize data coming from Google along with data coming from one of our own systems, join them together, and use that in some meaningful fashion. So to parameterize these types of things, what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to use the @parameter sign. So let's say, let's take a copy of this actually. Copy, paste. And let's start taking this. So I'm going to say this is going to be my ID. ID, start date. And here you can see that I'm just taking the values, not the actual labels or the variable names themselves. End date. Metrics and GA, we'll leave that part hard-coded, and visits, and everything else we'll leave hard-coded because this is not going to change. So now when we click next, you'll see that by using that @ sign, we filled in the parameter section. So now we have the ID, start date, and end date, and we can actually say that these are dates, not strings, which will allow us to easily control these things. So click OK, and now I have my URL parameters and my output, which I'm able to map to. So for example, you can imagine where we control it by using a function transformation, and specifically the date functions, date and time. Let's go find now. So let's find now is our end date. And let's say add hours is our start date. So we could take all the visits from the last hour. So we can do that by taking in a date. Oops. And the constant number 1. And then use this as our start date. And the ID might be some constant value as well. And then map it. now that I have that mapped, I can go ahead and call this preview. Now I didn't use the ID, so it's not going to give me relevant data, but we can see that I've moved along a little bit further in this example. And here I have the Google call filter. I gotten rid of those empty rows that came for some reason from Google. And I'm also taking another data set, and this time it's my customer data coming from the table. So I have a list of visits by country coming from, and by the way, this is Google Analytics. If you look at the available Google APIs, they're one of the champs. There's pretty much almost nothing you can't do with Google APIs. From their custom search, from AdWords to analytics, things I've never heard of before, but basically anything at your disposal is there at Google. As long as you just respect and don't abuse the services, you can get a lot of stuff for free. In this case, I'm getting the visits by country, and what we want to do is fix USA because I believe this other side is treating United States, and we're treating in our data as USA. So we want to have the same like thing. So we're going to go ahead and take an aggregate information of all of our customers. So let's take a look at what this data looks like from our customers table. So here you have the customer ID, customer name, contact, address, city, region, postal code, and country. And it's the country that we're interested in. So we want to take the aggregate and see, okay, how many customers we have by country. And here you can see that we have 6 for Germany, Mexico, and United States we have 5. So we want to compare that with the actual number of visits. So we want to create a report and we say, okay, how many visits results in a customer per country? So does one country just give us a lot of website visits but doesn't buy anything? And does one country doesn't visit our site a whole lot, but when they do buy something? So that's valuable information to know. And that's a lot of information that is available to you through Google, which you can quickly, easily use in Centerprise. So what we're going to do is go ahead and join these 2 bits of information using the join transformation. And when I do, you can see that I now have this information. Let me go ahead and sort it. So now you can see that France is the country where I have the most number of customers, but only 5 visits, and the United States has the most number of visits, but only 5 customers. So you can see that France is the country that I want to go after in this type of BI experiment that we've done here. So this is just a quick way that we were able to use Google APIs to be able to do that. Our last example, we are going to be using the box.com website. So in this case, we are going to, and if you're not familiar with box.com, it's just like everything else out there, Dropbox, SkyDrive, Amazon, S3, web services. So this is very similar to Amazon S3. This example is if you need to you're using data in an external store. So let's say you're storing all your files on an external web service instance, and then you need to process those files and then maybe send them back. So what we want to do first of all in this exercise is to be able to list the files. So I'm going to go ahead and preview the output here. So it's the first time logging in, might take a little bit. Here we go, list box files, and here you see I have output, response info, and the root, and I have a bunch of entries here. So I have order, and okay, that's the order, not the file I'm looking for. So here I've mapped it to a pass-through. I can go ahead and preview it. And so these are the file names that I have. I have my orders CSV and my orders 12,000 CSV. So let's take a look at and this is something. And just if you're not familiar with the Dropbox site, it's pretty good, pretty handy. Let's go ahead and look here. Here, as you can see, that there's our orders 1200.csv and orders.csv. So you can imagine if I want to edit these files and process them locally through Centerprise, I'm going to have to first take that list of files, grab the file what I want, or maybe I want to process multiple files. It's up to you on how you do it. You can do this in a extract, you can read the data itself from the file, or you can do something where you download the file and then process it, and then do some, maybe you'll have an upload on the other end of it. So in this case, what I have is I'm listing the box files, and then what I'm going to do is process it. So here's my parameters for the SubProcess, in which case I want to take the file and I want to write it, the bytes of that file, to another file path. So here you can see my flow consists of having the inputs. In this case, I have default values, which is the file ID, the output directory of where I want these to write to, and the file name, in this case, orders. So these are just test pieces of data. I'm actually going to set them from the outside, though. So here is my web service call. In this case here you can see that I have my URL parameter is the file itself. So that is necessary for this particular web service call. So you can see here I have that @ sign parameter. I'm using OAuth version 2 as my security mechanism. And then I have a default value here. Again, not necessary, but I have it. And then I don't need a layout builder because the input is actually coming from the URL. I'm not posting anything. So this is only available to you when you're actually posting information. And then I have no. You can see here that in this case I have the layout format as none, and that's important because I'm actually going to be getting the contents of the file. So let's go ahead and preview what this looks like here. And if I do that, you can see the output only has no output layout, but I do have the content. And if I look at the content, you can see it's a bunch of delimited data. So I can take that, create a new file, and then I'm going to call write bytes to file. So when I do that in succession, I can create a file for each of my files by utilizing this this mechanism here. So I'm going to read both file entries, send them to this subflow, and then that subflow is going to write 2 files. So let's go ahead and run that. So I'm going to go ahead and run it. And you see that it has elapsed the output directory. I'm going to go ahead and just navigate to it. I know where it's at. Services, download. As soon as I open it, there we go. And there's my orders.csv and orders 1200 or 12. I can't really see. My eyes are getting bad. 127,000.csv. So now that I have those files, what can I do with them? Well, now that I've downloaded them, I can go ahead and process them using another data flow. So let's go ahead and look at my box process flow. So the first step might be to download that part of that flow. The second step would be to utilize those files. So here you can see those files that I just wrote. And then have, let's say, a data flow where I then correct the data. In which case I'm going to read the file, use some sort of database lookup, filter out items which are not there. So let's go ahead and preview this on an existing file. And I'm basically filtering out any orphaned orders that don't have any items. So I've gone ahead and corrected that, wrote it to another file. Part of my process can be running quick, a little bit short on time here, so I'm going to go ahead and kind of skip ahead, but you can easily see how I can correct data. My next step might be to upload files back to Dropbox. So this is a way where you can use the kind of the download and then process method of processing. That's not the only way you can process these types of files, though, because I'm getting files in a delimited fashion. What I could do is just process them outright here. So instead of going through this whole download process, I can actually go, oops, not this one. I want this one. Instead of going through and writing files, the bytes to a separate file, what I can do is just go here and go to my text processors and utilize the delimited parser transformation. So I believe I have one of those already here. No? Box? No? Okay, so it looks like it's here. So I'm going to go ahead and take the box process of the file. Here, edit. Nope, not that one. Okay, looks like I don't have that saved as part of the project. Bear with me here. And correct data, I think this is it. Okay, let's see, order ID. Let's do this. Okay, so in the delimited parser, I'm going to build a layout for this particular data set that you see here. So I'm going to go open my data delimited parser, say that I'm getting multiple records out of here, and the layout is going to be this layout you see here. So I'm just going to say order ID, order date, customer ID, bill to, bill city, ship to, ship postal code. Okay. And now that I have my output layout, what I'm going to do now is just send the text directly, content, to the text parser. So now when I preview this one, let's go ahead and remove just the previous tab here. And I went ahead and already lost it, didn't I? There we go. So let's go ahead and now preview our output. There we go. So you see I have my text, the original text, and now I have the actual content nicely parsed. So in this case, I was able to skip the downloading of the file processing and putting it into little buckets, and I'm able to process the text directly. So that's kind of a little bit of how Centerprise can process data coming from multiple web services. Going back to our regularly scheduled program with the PowerPoint here. Things to consider when you're doing this is the built-in latency of web traffic. As you can see when I was previewing a couple things, especially on the first call, it might take a little bit to retrieve the data back, so you have to keep that in mind when you're actually creating flows. So you have to basically consider that you're going to get some lag between you and your data store or data center that you're contacting. Another thing to consider is that you have a metered service usage. So for example, Google keeps track, and so does Salesforce. They keep track of every request you make to their service, and after you only get so many before it stops working. Other services such as Box.com will actually slow you down, and they'll throttle you. The more you use it, the slower it'll get. So you keep that in mind. So as you build the flows, you're going to want to incorporate some sort of caching mechanism. So only go to the service when you absolutely need to. As you can see, when I was previewing, every time I previewed, I was making a call to the service. You're going to want to utilize a lot of caching mechanisms. So have some sort of expiration date that you set on some file that you store locally, retrieve the data, and then use that file from then on. Make sure you use a lot of, if you're using that whole file processing mechanism as I showed you in Box, that's a very good idea because then it allows you to divide and conquer. So basically, let's say you fail at a certain point down the line, you can go back to where you have that data already downloaded in some sort of file to be processed and not have to go back to the service again. Another thing to consider is data sensitivity. Keep in mind that this is over the internet, so you're going to want to make sure that you utilize all the best practices for keeping things secure. Utilize SSL, the latest OAuth 2 and OAuth 1, authentication mechanisms, and basically if you're, let's say you're using data from a very private and sensitive information locally, let's say you're using government information, and then you're sending that across the wire, make sure that you trust the entity on the other end of that wire. So that leaves us for questions and answers. I'm sorry I took the entire hour, but I'll hopefully, if you want to stick around, I can go ahead and answer some of these questions. If not, we will have all of these questions and more on the website. So let's go ahead and take a look at some of these here. So, okay, so can we talk about security and different authentication mechanisms available for REST calls? Sure. So the authentication mechanisms that we have inside this thing, and here because this is a demonstration, I have these kind of blanked out. But you'll normally fill in, what you'll do is you'll go to the website. Okay, so Centerprise is a tool, but it is not the application as so far as you're the consumer of this web service. So what you'll have to do is you'll have to you'll have to go and register an application on, let's say in this case, box.com. They'll give you an application key as well as an application secret, and then you'll get back an access token. So you can use that token along with a refresh token. So the access token and the refresh token will be used in order to authenticate yourself. So you can think of this as a valet key. OAuth version 1 works very similar. When you click on the generate, you can see that we have these endpoint variables in order for us to help to fill in that other point. So when you select the service and you sign into the service, it will present a website here that will enable you to get those values back from the website. So it's a three-part handshake. You fill in the key, then you basically confirming to that service who you are, and then they'll give you an access token. Then from then on, you'll use that access token to get data back from it. So OAuth 1 is more complicated. Most of the sites now are moving to OAuth version 2, which is much more simple. There's not as much handshaking, and it relies completely on SSL for security, as opposed to OAuth 1 had some other encryption mechanism that it used. Okay, can you describe again how you built the layout for REST put call for mapping? Okay, so in I believe that my example was that Zendesk one. Let's see here, which one was it? REST query, that was the get. But we can go ahead and use this. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this one, or let's just use it. Okay, so instead of that, I change, let's change it to tickets as my resource. Change the method to put, and go next, and now I'm going to I need some sort of input layout, because this time I'm actually sending a payload. So the payload I'm going to send depends on what the actual structure looks like. So in this case, let's say updating tickets. So updating tickets, I'm going to need, here it gives me the documentation for how to update a ticket. Here's an example request, and this is a very common mechanism for a web service provider. So how they detail how to work with their service, because there's no WSDL when you're talking about REST services, they have everything in documentation. So a lot of them usually will have some sort of sample request that you'll send. So you're going to use that sample request in order to use as sample text. In this case, we're talking about JSON. Use sample text. And doing that, I can click on Build Layout, which will then run the request and then give me that structure. So now that I have that structure, you can see that it shows up in my tree here. What are the deployment options for data flows containing web service calls? I'm not sure I understand that that question, but I'm assuming that it had to do with the authentication passwords and stuff like that. So all of that stuff can be parameterized, and you can store it in a file. You can, when you're talking about services, we can go to schedules. You'll see that we have the job parameters. Anytime you use a service, you'll find that service being here, and as well as the credential information. So you can replace the access key and the access token and the refresh token, so that you don't have to keep setting it. And also you can drive that through, let's say, an external configuration file. So when you deploy it, all of your credentials for those services. So let's say you have a sandbox service versus a real service. You can specify that in the file. Are the calls to your service synchronous or asynchronous? Currently they are synchronous, but we are working on the next version of the application where they are asynchronous. So currently synchronous, next version of the application you can have the option for asynchronous as well. Next question. Okay, and I believe that's all the time we have. I thank you for that. Sorry for running a little late, but if any other questions, please submit them to us at Astera.com, and you'll see them on the answer, and you'll get an email. Thank you for attending this demonstration, and we will get back to you. You can contact us at Astera.com. You can call us at this number. You can submit a question to Manir at sales@astera.com, or you can call us directly. You can send an email to her. Or again, you can, even better, you can go to support@astera.com and write a question in a nice handy-dandy forum. We'll have a service API to be able to read that message you just posted and send an email to us. So we use these quite a bit internally on our site. So thank you for attending. Hopefully this has been enlightening and you learned a little bit more about how Centerprise works with web services. Thank you very much. And